Dr. Arthington is going to join us again, and he's going to explain to us the variations in free choice mineral intake in our cow herd.
Can you hear me all right? Before I do that, I want to give some recognition to some more of our advisory council members that I noticed are here after I went back and sat down. Chuck Seifert and Jim Strickland and Jim Self are all here with us today. And I think that's our entire advisory council that's here. I really appreciate you gentlemen joining us here at the field day today. Also, I want to give some special recognition to a special guest that we have here today, and that's Dr. Elver Hodges, who's sitting up here in the front. Dr. Hodges was this research center's first forage agronomist and still lives in our community. And just recently, we received word that Dr. Hodges is going to be inducted into the Florida Agricultural Hall of Fame this February. And that's quite an accomplishment for Dr. Hodges. We're proud that he's part of us and part of IFAS. And so you might say hi to him as we move through the morning. The other thing I want to remind everyone is we're moving along very well with our time. And I want you all to take some time when we're done here and go over and meet some of the vendors that have come here today. These are all individuals that many of you see around all of the events that occur in our industry, part of our allied folks that help support us here with products and services and also gifts for the research and education programs that we conduct. So with that, I'm going to move on and talk to you about a topic that is interesting to me, and I think it should be interesting to all of you as well, with the cost of trace mineral supplements that we all deal with. I remember when I first got involved with budgeting the cow herd here at Ona, we would budget $8 to $10 a year for mineral in our cows. And we didn't feed anything that exciting or that high end, but I'll tell you what, you can't do that today, can you? What do you think, or what are you paying for a bag of mineral today for your cow herd? It's hard to find one at $10 that's worth anything, isn't it? And there's a lot of them out there that's 15 and higher, right? And so $600 a ton, depending on the volume that you're purchasing, is not uncommon anymore. And so this whole idea that mineral nutrition is just cheap insurance for our cows, to me, doesn't make sense. We often share these discussions about why cows eat mineral and why they don't. And if you'll open up your book and turn to page 18, there's a figure in there that we published several years ago on our Brayford herd here at Ona. We feed a pretty basic, I think, well-formulated mineral product here that is formulated for a 2-ounce-a-day intake. Now, if we provide that to these cows on a weekly basis, 2 ounces a day, 14 ounces per cow per week, and we measure what they don't eat after a week goes by, we call that refusal. All right, so that's we expected her to eat 2 ounces a day. We go back and measure what that herd didn't eat, and we'll call that refusal. In the summertime, if you look on there, there's 0 refusals. They eat everything. How many of you realize this at your herds? You see this, don't you, in the summertime with your herds. In the wintertime, there starts to be significant refusals. They just don't eat as much. Now, a lot of you have heard that my cows are eating a lot of mineral, they must need it, right? There must be a deficiency somewhere. And let me tell you, that's not true. How many of you heard me tell you that that's not true? Just because they're eating it doesn't mean they need it, and just because they're not eating it doesn't mean they don't need it. How many of you don't believe me? I know a lot of you leave there and think, that Arthington's crazy. My grandpa told me years ago, if they eat a lot of mineral, it's because they need it. And they don't. They don't know what they need. Has any of you ever heard of grass tetany? Fortunately, we don't have a big problem with it in South Florida, but the folks up north do. You know what it is? Magnesium deficiency. And if you take magnesium oxide and you put it out into a pasture where cattle are prone to grass tetany, they will die of magnesium deficiency before they'll ever eat that magnesium oxide. They don't know what they need. They're eating that mineral because they're craving salt. That's why. And so they will overeat sodium, consumption of sodium. They'll overeat sodium because they're craving the salt during that summer month, those summer months. Now, if they always have mineral out in front of them, which is salt-based mineral that all of you feed, they will never be deficient in salt. They'll eat enough, so they at least have enough salt, but they will often overeat it. Dr. Martins, Paula Martins, is a postdoctoral associate working here at the program, and a couple weeks ago I asked Paula to estimate what the sodium intake was of our cows right now, because this is the time of year that they're just eating us out of house and home, mineral. And we're estimating intakes of 40 grams a day of sodium. 40 grams a day of sodium. And their requirement's about 15 to 18 grams a day. So really, really overeating the mineral. Now, I tell you this story, and a lot of you believe that it's true, but at the end of the day, many of you have told me, John, I'm not really willing to do anything about it because it's just cheap insurance. All right? It's just cheap insurance. So I'm just going to make sure that my cows have what they need. But I'm telling you, they don't need it. And now it's no longer cheap insurance. When we used to be able to buy $200, $300 a ton mineral, and now it's twice that, it's no longer cheap insurance. Why not harvest back $20 a cow that you're now overfeeding and only creating expensive urine and putting that back into the cows in energy and protein in the winter when we really need it? You see what I mean? So harvest that money back and use it for other inputs that you know you might need as the year goes on. But how do you do that? Well, one of the ways that you can do it is take your mineral and cut it with white stock salt. So you can buy just straight white stock salt, much less expensive than what you buy complete mineral for. And I have a lot of ranches that practice this today. We practice it here. It doesn't have to be sharp science. If you're feeding a product that's formulated for 2 ounces a day and you monitor it every week, it doesn't take a lot to monitor it every week. And if they're eating 4 ounces a day, then cut it 50-50 with white stock salt. It works. But where I run into some problems is the fall's going to be coming on and their natural craving for salt will go down, and if you keep cutting it 50-50, then they're not going to be getting enough mineral. You see what I mean? So it takes some time, but it also pays you back quite well to pay attention to that intake. Allow the cows to eat what they need to eat, but do it by adding white stock salt. Now, don't ever add the white stock salt separately. Always mix it with your mineral. You don't need a mixer. Just take 2 bags, pour them in your mineral feeder, take your hand, mix it together. All right? If you put it separately, then you're giving the cow the opportunity to make up her mind what she wants to eat. Don't ever let her do that. You make up her mind for her and mix it together. All right? Now, I want to tell you a little bit more about mineral nutrition and some of the things that we're doing here at the center. Almost all of you that have beef cow herd are weaning your calves and selling them shortly after weaning, and many of you are selling them at the time of weaning. And in Florida, our #1 trace element in terms of the occurrence of deficiency is selenium. #2 is copper, and #3 is zinc. Now, depending on the ranch, it may vary. Those 3 might vary in order. But of the trace elements, those are the 3. Selenium is almost always deficient. We just finished a study, or in the process of finishing a study, where I worked with 16 different herds in South Florida, where we enrolled 3,500 cows onto a study. And we evaluated the trace mineral status of those herds. I think about 2/3 of them were selenium deficient. Now you can imagine, if this rancher is willing to put up with me working at the ranch and working with their cows and collecting samples, they're probably paying pretty close attention to their cows, right? They've been working with the research center for a while. These are well-managed herds, and over half of them are selenium deficient. Imagine what's happening with those calves, because the calves are born to selenium deficient cows, but those calves are almost always selenium sufficient at birth. But then the selenium concentrations in the calf tissues decrease over time. The same thing happens with copper and zinc. Now, imagine what happens at weaning. We impose the most stressful condition the calf will ever experience in its life, and that's separation from its mother at the time of weaning. It's the most stressful condition ever. Now, a lot of us here at the research center included, we also load them on a truck and ship them 1,000 miles on the same day. That is a very stressful event, and just like humans, calves are the same way. When they undergo stress, they liberate these trace minerals from the tissues. It goes back into systemic circulation, cleared through the kidney, it goes out in urine. All right? So the animal starts excreting tremendous amounts of selenium, copper, and zinc at the time of these stressful events. So you take an animal that's already in marginal mineral status and you create a problem. At your ranch, those animals might have been okay, but by the time they're 2 or 3 weeks after weaning, they're on the border of mineral deficiency. So we want to take opportunities to maximize mineral nutrition where we know we need it. And I can tell you where at least a couple of those are. Prior to weaning, anything we can do to maximize mineral nutrition of the calf is going to add value to that calf. I can promise you that. Now, 5 out of 10 studies will show no response at all, but the other 5 will because of what? Because of stress. You can take a mineral deficient animal, and we've ran these studies and my colleagues and other institutions have, and you raise that animal stress-free and they track right along, even mineral deficient. But you overlay a stress on top of that animal, and the stress can be normal, like vaccination or calving. And then you run into these problems. So pre-weaning is one area that we've really been focusing on, trying to find ways to optimize the mineral nutrition of these calves. So one of the things we've been looking at is what we call limit-fed creep feeds. Limit-fed creep feeding. I really don't like the word creep feeding, but it means something to all of you, so I don't have to describe what it is. The reason I don't like it is that economically, creep feeding is almost always a bad investment. Almost always. Unless you're doing it for a reason other than body weight gain. In our example, we're doing it to maximize trace mineral status of the calf. And so through limit feeding, we've been targeting about 100 days prior to weaning, delivering creep feed only 3 times a week at amounts equivalent to about 1/2 pound a day to these calves. And these are mineral fortified creep feeds. So that at the time of weaning, these calves have optimal mineral status. Now I want to show you what's happened through this process. We've ran now 11 studies, some using trace minerals, some not. And through these limit creep feeds, we're able to get efficiencies of gain equivalent to about 40 cents per pound of added gain. That's good, isn't it? It's enough efficiency of gain to entirely pay for the product over those 100 days. But one of the problems we have is that when we add trace minerals to it, we have problems with intake. And if you look on page 20, you'll see results of a study that we recently published where we're looking at limit-fed creep feeds in calves that contain mineral fortification or don't. And if we add trace minerals to those limit-fed creep feeds, the calves do not like to eat them. All right? So why do you think that is? Have you ever had a terrible metallic taste in your mouth? Now, if you decide to run this experiment, I would tell you to do it on a very, very small scale. But try putting a little bit of copper sulfate on your tongue and see what it tastes like. It's terrible. And these calves, we've learned, have a tremendous sensitivity to these foul tastes. At least that's what we're hypothesizing. So you add these 2 limit-fed creeps and you provide it to these calves, and the ones that have mineral in it, the calves want nothing to do with it. The ones that don't have any mineral in it, but everything else is the same, they eat readily. And this has been an obstacle that we've been trying to deal with. The same thing doesn't seem to be the case with mature animals. In fact, we take what's left over, what those calves didn't eat of the mineral fortified cubes, feed, and we give it to our bulls out in the bull pasture that aren't on a study, and they'll knock each other over to get to it. They eat it just fine. The calves are very sensitive. So this is a roadblock in this application that we've been trying to overcome. So recently we've been working with another inorganic mineral form that is termed in this class we call hydroxychlorides. The trade name is Injectable, and they're offered through a company called Micronutrients out of Indianapolis, Indiana. Now, I have worked with these elements before, but never with calves. I've had good experiences with them in growing animals, but never worked with them with calves. And I was showing these data to a gentleman, Dr. Jerry Spears, who, when I was in graduate school, was always a friend and a mentor of mine, and continues to today. And he said, John, you ought to look at those hydroxychlorides because they're highly insoluble. And what that means is that they don't go into solution. The metal does not disassociate from its inorganic bond at normal pHs, like what would be in your mouth or in the mouth of the calf or in the rumen. So the thought was that we could probably come in and provide these as elemental sources of these metals, these trace elements, and maybe the calves would eat them better. And so if you look at figure 3, you'll see the results of our first study, where we formulated these feedstuffs and offered them to young calves. Now, what we did is we formulated 3 feeds, and these were provided to us through some support with a company called Provimi Vigortone out of Brookville, Ohio. I really thank them for the help that they gave us formulating and making these diets for us, because this is not easy. And they made these diets for me that contain the same amounts of copper, zinc, and manganese, but from 3 sources. Either a normal sulfate source, which is pretty much the common carrier for these elements in our feeds, or the hydroxychloride source, which is this new source that's fairly insoluble, or I should say highly insoluble, and then an organic, a commercially available organic mineral source. And we offered them to the calves, and what you see on the y-axis there is the intake as a percent of offer. These calves eat these readily. And so it really, really worked well for us in terms of getting these trace minerals into the calves. We followed this up later with a field study where we fed some of these sources to cattle on pasture and really had a positive response in terms of their preferential intake, their consumption of the product, and subsequent performance pre-weaning. And so I'm really encouraged by this. I really think that we have opportunities to utilize some of these technologies to optimize mineral nutrition in our calves. In my opinion, I think this is one of the more exciting things that's happened to trace mineral nutrition of beef cattle. When we think about the preferential intake, even of our mature cows, a lot of you can see your calves eating that salt-based mineral out in the pasture, right? A lot of you see that. Well, if we're able to offer cows sources of these minerals that have more preferential intake for these young calves, maybe just in pasture situations we'll be able to improve the mineral status of those calves. And so we're continuing to make this kind of a focus area for application in our cow herds and try to learn more about it. So with that, I'll address any questions that you might have, and we'll turn you loose to visit with some of our allied industry members. Yeah, Dr. Garrett.
When you were testing for selenium deficiency, was it blood or tissue?
Yeah. So the question was, is it blood or tissue? In our study, we always use tissue. Now, sometimes, Doc, we will use enzymes in the blood that are selenium dependent. And we'll use an enzyme that is called glutathione peroxidase. It's a really good selenium indicator, but it's very expensive. So we only do it on some of our confinement studies here. But out in the field, we always use tissue. And if any of you are doing this, there's a lot of veterinarians in our area, in South Florida now, that are getting very good at collecting these liver biopsies. And I would really encourage you, if you ever want to look at your herd, to consider that. Yes, sir.
The mineral I'm using is $15.95 a bag, which works out, and they call for 4 ounces per day, which is like $29 a year per cow. Are you you and others use figures on 2 ounces a day.
Yeah.
Is this company just calling for a higher amount just to sell more, or is it necessary?
Well, so the question is, why is your mineral 4 ounce and my mineral's 2 ounce, right? And okay, sometimes you'll see a range on the tag of 2 to 3 or 2 to 4 ounces a day. Generally, what we find is that the lower salt containing minerals will have a little bit higher intake, and that's because salt regulates intake. They're craving for sodium. Can you get by feeding a 2 ounce a day versus a 4 ounce a day mineral? Absolutely. Lots of people do. The 4 ounce a day minerals, however, are much more common products throughout the United States. We feed a 2 ounce a day mineral here because it just works better for us in our application. I like a high salt containing mineral. Part of that reason is I don't need a lot of room in my formulation space for phosphorus, because we just don't have phosphorus issues here. When we need phosphorus the most is at peak lactation, and that's when we're feeding winter supplements that are fortified with phosphorus. The rest of the year, our gases supply adequate amounts of phosphorus. Some of you need to get more phosphorus in your cows, and to do so, you're going to have to feed a product that has a little bit higher intake, like a 4 ounce a day product, or more, 4 to 6 a day, which is quite common throughout the United States. So I would be happy to work with you one-on-one and look at that. Maybe we could come up with some ideas that might work as good or better for you, but I wouldn't be concerned about a 4 ounce a day product. Not at all. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any amount of the mineral that the cow takes in that's passed through the milk to the calf?
Yeah, okay. So the question is there mineral intake that's passed on through the milk? Unfortunately, milk is a poor transporter of mineral. Now, interestingly, some countries pay a premium for selenium content in milk because they recognize the importance of selenium nutrition in young children and growing adolescents. But getting it from the cow into the milk is difficult. And so I would never encourage people to consider that as a transport vehicle. Now, if you and I sat down and we looked across all the literature and even our data, yeah, I can show you slight increases in the milk. But it's a very inefficient way of doing it, of getting it to the calf. All right? The best way to do it is make sure that calves are born to mineral adequate cows, because that cow will give that calf everything she has to make sure that that calf's born adequate. Okay? And then the other way is to make sure that we get that calf to eat a feed stuff that is mineral fortified, whether that be forage or supplement. Yeah, Dr. Grimm.
You said 1/3 of the cattle in your study were not selenium deficient. Can you comment on how that occurred versus the 2/3 that were selenium deficient?
So the question is, there were some herds that weren't selenium deficient, right? Why is that? All right, one of the cooperators was feeding a selenium fortified supplement and being very cautious to make sure the cows were eating that supplement. And that producer's herds had the greatest selenium status. All right, that was purely nutritional, the greatest selenium status. So the other herds on any given day could have been selenium deficient. They were so close that they could have been. Our herds were one of them. Our herds was one of them that was selenium deficient here. Okay? So a lot of times people will bring me tags, mineral tags. They'll fax them, email them, or bring them in and say, here's what I'm feeding. What does this look like? And it tells me nothing because I don't know how much the cow's eating, right? So that's the biggest problem. Intake is the problem. So people say a lot of times, I need more selenium in my supplement. Well, you might need more, but the fact that cows aren't eating any of it doesn't matter how much you put in it. And so ranchers and producers that really pay attention to what their cows are eating through the mineral supplement often are the ones that have the greatest mineral status. If you, in the paper here, I talk about controlled mineral feeding. If you can't get your cows to eat mineral, one of the best ways to address that is to put the mineral in a supplement. All right, put your mineral in the supplement and feed it to the cows. That's called controlled mineral feeding. And we have producers doing this on the East Coast. that have ranchers with saltwater intrusion into their water. Cows are drinking high sodium water, they just don't crave mineral, they won't eat it. So if you take and formulate a product with a little bit of mineral in a cube, and don't feed a lot of it, feed it once a week at maybe 2 pounds of an intake that will deliver all the mineral those cows need, I'll guarantee you, you will address mineral deficiency in your cows. It really works good. And it should be economical. I have really worked hard with my friends in the feed company to feed companies to offer these technologies to producers. And some of them are starting to do that. It's a little bit of a mindset change, because a lot of times feed companies, they exist due to the tonnage that they sell, right? The amount of margin or profit that they can make on tonnage. And I don't blame them for that. They're all in the business for that. And so when they think about offering a product that you only feed it a half a pound a day, that doesn't sound very exciting, does it? But if a producer can replace their trace mineral program with that certain times of the year and not cost them any more, I think it's a win-win for everybody. So intake is key. Yes, sir.
If you were testing your herd, what percentage of your herd would you test
Yeah.
to see?
So the question is, if you're going to test your herd, what percentage would you test? If I came to your ranch and did a complete trace mineral evaluation, it would cost, just my straight cost would cost about $1,000. That's a lot of money. People aren't going to do that every year. We might be able to do it for $700 or $800. That's just lab fees and the consumable cost. I generally will collect 16 samples. All right? So you say, well, geez, if I have 2,000 cows or if I have 100 cows, you still going to do 16? Probably. Because if I do many more than 16, it becomes cost prohibitive. And what I can do with 16 is I can create what's called a normal distribution on a bell-shaped curve. And I'll throw out the 2 highest and the 2 lowest, and that'll give me an average of 12. And that always seems to hit pretty good. Where we run into problems is I'll come over to your place and you'll say, John, there's something wrong with this cow, I want you to collect her. Those aren't the ones I want to do, right? I want to do the average of your herd. Take the average of your herd, not your culled cows, not your best cows, but the average of the herd. And let's take a picture at those.
I have a question. From earlier, we were talking about the selenium in the calves. Would you think that maybe comparing an injectable mineral to your supplement creek feed, it might be more cost effective if it would work?
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody vaccinates their calves for blackleg, they could add injectable mineral to it, couldn't they, if it worked?
Yeah. So the question is, what about injectable trace minerals? So we've been working with them quite a bit, and so have some of our colleagues, and we can definitely create an increase in mineral status with injectable trace minerals. And we can augment that decrease in selenium in the developing calf pre-weaning with injectable trace minerals. They do work. I think that we need to do a better job refining the timing of it to make sure that we get it right. And I really want to be careful that none of our producers view this as a replacement of free choice trace minerals, because it's not. It's a tool that we can use at specific times to maybe address specific conditions. Now, as usual, I've rambled on quite a bit, and I want to give time for everyone to have lunch and to enjoy the rest of their afternoon, but I'm not going to go anywhere. So if you have questions, please address them. Is that right? Yes. Don't you think we ought to get going? All right. Thank you. I appreciate your attention.